we have introduced slope. We've looked at the 4 types of slope, and what we're going to do now, we're going to actually put the slope of a line with a number. There is a number that represents the slope of a line, and that's what we want to look at today. Slope is actually a ratio, which means it is most often expressed as a fraction. Slope compares the change in a line's y-coordinates, I'm going to abbreviate coordinates, to the change in its x-coordinates. Okay, slope is a ratio. It compares the change in a line's y-coordinates to the change in its x-coordinates. You might see slope written as rise over run. That's one way you might see it, because y-coordinates move up or down, that's a line's rise, and x-coordinates move left or right, that's a line's run. Okay, so you may also see rise over run. Another way you may see it uses a Greek letter. It's a little triangle. That's the Greek letter delta. So we could say delta y over delta x, and delta means change in. So this is change in y over change in x. Now the 2 things we want to learn today are how to find the slope from a graph and from a table. Okay? Now, look at what you got here. We've got a line, and notice that they have picked 2 points on that line. So what you got to have 2 points. Point there, a point there. Now, we want to compare this line's rise to its run. We want to compare the change in the y-coordinates to the change in the x-coordinates. So what you want to do is you want to draw a right triangle. You want to use grid lines. And you want to draw the right triangle that connects those 2 points. This is sort of like when we found the distance using Pythagorean theorem, right? Remember drawing that right triangle in? Okay? Now, just like we did then, we're going to count the sides, but this time instead of thinking of them as legs, we're going to look at the rise and the run. We want to do delta y over delta x, which is the change in y over the change in x. Now the change in y is the rise, that's the up and down. Y values go up and down, so we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The change in y for this line is 6. Okay? Now we're going to do the change in x, so we're going to count the run, which is the horizontal movement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, one thing I forgot to point out. Does this line have positive or negative slope? It has positive slope. Okay, so we should have a positive number, which we do. We're good. If the slope will simplify, you simplify it. 6 over 8 will simplify down to what, 3/4? So the slope of this line is 3/4. The rise is 3, the run is 4. The rise is 6, the run is 8. That simplifies to 3/4. Okay? Now let's look at the next line. We're going to find the slope. We're going to do that by finding the change in y over the change in x. This line, what kind of slope does it have? Think about slope dude. We're going down from left and right. This is a nice negative. So this line has negative slope. Do your fraction bar. We're going to draw in our triangle, our right triangle, so we want to use grid lines. And we want to count the change in y, that's up and down, that's 1, over the change in x. So we want to count the horizontal movement, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the slope of this line is negative 1/5. The change in y over the change in x is negative 1/5. Now, what about our special cases? You already know this is what kind of line. This is a horizontal line, and a horizontal line has what kind of slope? We looked at this in class. The slope of this line is 0. Done. Okay? There's no work you have to show here, but I want you to write this in some notes so you can see it. Why is it 0? Well, let's look at the change in y over the change in x. All right, first of all, can we draw a right triangle using grid lines? between these 2 points? No. You could do part of a rectangle, but you could not do a right triangle. So that should be a clue something's weird. The other thing is, look at this line. What kind of rise does a horizontal line have? Does it have any rise? Does it rise at all? No. So its rise is 0. What's the run between these 2 points? Well, there is some change in x, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 between those 2 points. Now, what's 0 divided by anything? Well, if I have no money, I have $0, I'm going to share it with all of you. You all get how much? You get nothing. 0 divided by a number is 0. 0 split up into any number of groups is 0. Now, what about this vertical line? You already know that a vertical line has what kind of slope? It has undefined slope, right? We've already talked about that. Slope dude goes off the cliff. He yells, undefined, and he becomes undefined himself, all right? But let's use our delta y over delta x. Okay? Does this line have rise? Do the y coordinates change? Yes, the y coordinates change, and the rise is 1, 2, 3, 4. So the rise is 4. What is the run of this line? Does a vertical line have any horizontal movement? Do the x coordinates change? No. Now, we're trying to divide by 0. One of the big rules of math is that you cannot divide by 0, okay? Division by 0 is undefined. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. If you have 0 in a denominator, it is undefined, okay? One way to remember this may or may not help, but I heard a teacher at the high school teaches it this way. If 0 is in the top, that is okay. 0 in the numerator is 0. But if 0 is in the bottom, that's a big no. You can't have 0 in the denominator. You cannot divide by 0. Okay? So division by 0 is undefined. All right, I want you to pause the video. You try to find the slope of these 3 lines and then turn the video back on and check it. All right, for the first line, I got that the slope was a positive 2/3. The middle line is undefined because it is a vertical line. You don't have to show any work for that. If you know a vertical line has undefined slope, just write it. And the second, or the last line, the slope is -1/2. Okay? Check and make sure that's what you got. A couple things I wanted to point out. You can draw the triangle on either side of the 2 points. Like here, I drew this triangle. You could draw the triangle underneath. That's okay. Here, I drew the one underneath. You could draw the triangle up above. All right? That's okay. Couple of things about simplifying. If you get something like 6/3, that simplifies to 2. That's a whole number. That's okay. You can simplify to a whole number. If you get an improper fraction, like -5/2, leave it alone. Slope compares a change in y coordinates to change in x coordinates. It needs to remain a fraction. Do not ever change to a mixed number when you're doing slope. Okay? All right, now let's look at a table. Okay, same thing with a table. We are looking for the change in y over the change in x. Now, this table here is horizontal. The x values are on top, so this is my change in x. Now, what I want to ask is what happens to get from -6 to -2? How do you get from -6 to -2? What do? You add 4, right? How do you get from -2 to +2? You add 4. How do you get from 2 to 6? You add 4, okay? Now, let's look at the bottom. That's the y value, so this would be your delta y, your change in y. How do you get from -2 to -1? You add 1. From -1 to 0, you add 1. From 0 to 1, you add 1. So, what's the change in y of this table? The change in y is 1. The change in x is 4. The slope of this line is 1/4. Okay, this other one, the table is done vertically. Same idea. Let's find our delta x, our change in x. How do we get from -1 to 1? What do? You add 2. From 1 to 3, you add 2. From 3 to 5, you add 2. Notice that's constant. Notice that stays the same every time. How do you get from -2 to 0? You add 2. From 0 to 2, you add 2. From 2 to 4, you add 2. So when I find the change in y over the change in x, what am I going to get? I get 2 over 2. That simplifies to a whole number, which is 1. That's okay. A whole number is fine because we can always put it over 1 and make it into a fraction. All right, pause the video. You find the slope from the next two tables, then turn it back on to check your work. All right, the first one wasn't any problem. Did you get -1/4? Change in y over change in x? The second one, either I put some numbers in wrong or I did something I didn't intend to. Notice the change is not constant. I got 1 over 5, I have 1 over 2, I have 1 over 8. This isn't even a line. I messed up. I didn't mean to put here. This is not linear because the slope is not the same number every time, okay? So, sorry about that. Hope I didn't make you panic too much, but that one's not even linear, but everything else is okay. If you have any questions, write them down. We will look at slope tomorrow.